Hello and welcome to the Brave Business podcast, brought to you by accounting, tax audit and advisory firm Blick Rothenberg. Brave by name and brave by nature, this series is different. Aimed at entrepreneurial businesses, we focus on providing practical guidance, timely insights and professional opinions from industry experts, helping you make informed decisions for your business. I'm Declan Curry, journalist and broadcaster. Today we're looking at the topic of the founder's mindset. How can founders become effective leaders, no matter what stage they're on the business journey? And how can leaders develop a founder's mindset to scale or evolve their business? What challenges might they face? What lessons could they learn along the way? To discuss all of this, we have from Blick Rothenberg, its partner Malli, Kini, and our guest, the founder and president of Miniclip, Rob Small, and Simon Court, who's founder and chairman of Value Partnership and also author of the book Founder's Legacy. Welcome to the three of you. And Malli, Kini, from Blick Rothenberg, as a partner there, you deal with founders all the time. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you, Declan. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Malli Kini. I'm a tax partner at Blick Rothenberg, and I lead on the entrepreneurs practice. So I help entrepreneurs scale from startup all the way through to an exit, and looking after their business and them as individuals as well.
Rob, tell me what Miniclip is.
Hi, Declan. So, my name is Rob Small. I'm the co-founder and president of Miniclip. Miniclip is an international games company. I started the company 25 years ago and served as the CEO for more than 2 decades. During that time, Miniclip was 2 distinctly different businesses. In the first 10 years, miniclip.com was a free games website. And for the last 15 or so years, Miniclip evolved into becoming one of the largest mobile games companies in the world. Fortunately, due to our success, we managed to sell the company to Tencent in 2015, Tencent being one of the largest Chinese tech companies.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I imagine they paid nicely for it.
We did okay. Miniclip is probably most well known for games like 8-Ball Pool and Subway Surfers. They're 2 of the largest games in the app stores. They've generated billions of downloads. And our vision at Miniclip is to unleash the gamer in everyone. And we've been doing a pretty good job of that over the last few years. We've grown the company about 10 times bigger. Since we sold it to Tencent, we have about 60 million players per day. We have 20 game studios, 1,600 staff, and just shy of $1 billion of revenue. So it's been a good ride so far.
So the business thriving to this day.
Yes.
And I've got to share this with our audience who are listening to this, that some of them may not recognize the name. Some of them will know the name very, very well indeed, because as you were being settled into the studio and one of our colleagues here overheard the name of the company, the reaction was, oh my goodness, that's defined my childhood. Does that happen to you a lot?
It does, and I always love it when it does happen to me. Yeah, it's a great feeling that we've helped to distract people during their childhood from doing schoolwork and things like that.
And in all quarters of the world, I understand.
Yes, indeed. Yes, from Thailand to London to New York. Yep.
So next to you is Simon Court, who's the founder and chairman of Value Partnership. And Simon, you're very welcome to this discussion. In your book, Founder's Legacy, you've written, in fact, in the book you describe Rob as one of your business heroes.
Yeah, so there are 2 business heroes in the book. One is Rob, a classic founder story, which I think we'll probably get into in our conversation. And the other, Jan Boltz, who was appointed chief executive of a founder-owned business in Germany and created one of Germany's first tech unicorns. So that's Tipico. So both of those stories I was privileged enough to play an important role in, and a lot of the lessons from both of those stories I hope are fully embraced in the book.
And it's important that you've mentioned both, because one, Rob, is the founder, the other, Jan, is the leader. And your book is the exploration of how nowadays founders also need to think like leaders, and leaders also need to think like founders, even though they are two quite different beasts.
Yeah, they are different beasts, aren't they? And the founders are the sort of biological parents of the business, and I think they learn, at least Rob did, at some point, and if they learn it soon enough, then they have every chance of building a great company and a successful business. That ownership and leadership are not the same thing. And leadership involves learning some new skills, and it involves taking responsibility for the performance and the future of the business in the way that Rob did. And in a different context in the way that Jan did. He already came as an experienced leader, but he had to navigate this founder environment. I think that's quite challenging for people.
To reinvent the business or to
yeah, exactly. Yeah. To raise the level of professionalism, to bring some energy to things that the founders were not paying attention to, such as how do we build the company and the infrastructure and the organization, and do those things that founders don't always take to naturally because they're inherently creators and they are in love with their product and their purpose. And it requires a pivot from them to really embrace the leadership role. And not all of them do it, and certainly not all of them do it as successfully as Rob here did.
Rob, flesh it out for us from your perspective and experience, that journey as a founder, realizing you also need to become a leader. Talk us through that.
Well, the story of Miniclip started way back in the 1980s in my childhood. I grew up in an analog household, I would describe it as. No TV till I was 10 years old, and I spent my childhood digging holes and climbing trees. But I was very envious of my friends at school that had computers and pestered my parents to buy me a computer. And that was the moment that ignited my love of games. I'm dyslexic, and that meant that games was an amazing place for me to escape to. Education was a rocky road for me. And after I graduated university, I perhaps didn't have the wide number of options that some people might have in terms of careers to follow. And that's why I decided I wanted to set up my own business. It was the late 1990s, and if you remember back then, the world was abuzz at the potential of the internet. The bubble was growing, and everyone was interested about how it could revolutionize everything that we would do in the world, a bit like AI is today. And I was extremely excited at reading about these companies, mainly in America, that were listing on the NASDAQ for billions of dollars. And I looked at the founders of those companies and thought, basically, I want a piece of that. I want to try and do that. And so with a huge degree of naivety, I decided to set up my own company. And of course, the odds of failure are extremely high, but being dyslexic, I relished risk-taking. And we decided to try to revolutionize the traditional games industry and disrupt it. And we did that by building a product that we wanted as young 20-year-olds, and that was basically free games over the internet. We spent a lot of our time in the late 90s taking music from the first file sharing websites, and we thought, why can't we do the same with games? And so that was the kind of founding principle of Miniclip. Our timing was great. We had incredible growth without any external funding. We grew the company to over 50 million players, and it was an amazing ride. So that was the kind of early start of the company.
So that was your journey as a founder, and you were comfortable with that. You liked being the boss. You liked that you had set this company up.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I wanted to do things the way that I believed they should be done. I didn't really compare myself to anyone else. I hadn't read any business books. A little bit of making it up as you go along. But we were at the bleeding edge of a new industry, and I like to distance myself from the traditional ways that I saw business being done. So we were very unconventional. We had staff all around the world, and we didn't actually have a business model at the start of our business. We didn't know how we were going to make money. I remember my father saying to me once, Rob, this is great, this success that you have with many people playing games on your website, but how are you actually going to make any money? And I said, I don't really know, Dad, but I'll figure it out at some stage. Fortunately, I did.
And then there was a point when you realized, or your team realized, that things had to evolve.
There was. Because like all stories, all good things come to an end. And after almost a decade of Miniclip surfing the growth of the internet around the world, none other than Steve Jobs laid down the challenge to us, because he walked out onto a stage in Cupertino in the late noughties and announced the release of the iPhone 3G. And at the time, we had been exploring how Miniclip games could work on the old feature phone devices like Nokia phones and Ericsson phones. But it really was very difficult to take the business onto those platforms. But once the iPhone was released, we saw the potential. Sadly for us, our users were kind of early tech adopters, and we hadn't anticipated how quickly they would move from miniclip.com onto a smartphone. And that was really where we faced the big challenge, because we started to see declines in our users. We started to lose money. And it was an extremely panicked time, because we'd spent a decade building this business. We had 8 offices, 250 people.
And you could see it all vanishing.
I could see it crumbling under my feet. And I flew to San Francisco. I went to Sand Hill Road, the famous road where all the venture capitalists live. And I knocked on all their doors and said, "Remember me, miniclip.com? Well, we're moving to mobile now. Would you like to invest in us?" And they said, "Nah, we're not really sure that you're going to make the transition." And they closed the door in my face.
Why did they think that?
Well, it was an enormous challenge for us to move from a website that was essentially a collection of other people's games to mobile, an entirely new platform that had a different business model, where you were selling games for 99 cents in the early days. And so at the end of the day, I understood their perspective. It did look like a monumental challenge, but in a way, it put the fire in my belly to prove them wrong. And so when I came back to London, I was quite panicked at the time, but I thought we can find a way through this. And my HR director, she could see that I was struggling a little bit, and she came to me and said, "Have you ever thought about talking to a consultant?" And I said, "To be honest, no. What would a consultant know about a highly disruptive games business like Miniclip?" And she pressed the point, and she was so convinced that she said to me, "Rob, I'm going to bet you my next month's pay packet that if you take a meeting with this guy called Simon Court, he'll be able to help you." And I like gambling, so I took the bet. And I met Simon, and we hit it off almost immediately. And Simon could see the enormity of the challenge, but he could also really help us think through, how we could tackle that. And that was the first time that Simon and I met.
And you've paid out the debt to your colleague, yes?
Yes, I have. Time's over.
Simon, at that stage, you get involved. Describe that meeting. Just describe that point where the founder realizes they've had great success, but they need to take it to the next step, and they can't do it on their own.
Yeah, so a lot of them don't ask for help, and I never meet them, generally speaking. And I think that it probably ends up in a bad place. One of the great things about Rob and others I've worked with, if you're capable, as Rob was, of saying, "Actually, I'm not sure what to do now, I need help," and ask for help, and kind of lean into the fact that you're in difficulty, but you still have conviction, as Rob did, that there was a way through. We just had to find it. Then the situation is addressable. And I think the quality of the relationship between Rob and I, and Jan and I and others, is the thing that makes it possible to do good work together. Because if he can be brutally honest with me about the struggle, and I can be brutally honest with him about what I'm seeing and how I'm experiencing him or his team or his business, I think we can solve most of those problems. So the underlying quality that Rob had, that Jan had in a very different context, was this sort of openness to learning and a desire to solve these problems, and a willingness to roll up sleeves and get stuck into it. And Rob was, almost the perfect illustration of what that looks like at its best.
Is it difficult asking for help like that?
I think this is one of the advantages of dyslexia, because when you are dyslexic, you realize that you can't do everything on your own. And so I think I recognized early on in the business journey that I would need other people's help to bring my vision to life. So when it came to meeting Simon, I mean, obviously I wanted him to help, but I trusted him and I believed that he wanted the best outcome for my business, which was absolutely critical. But I did feel like I could share the burden of that stress. And being the CEO can sometimes feel like a very lonely place. The organization is looking at you to help them to understand how you're going to save the business. And that's when it's an amazing feeling to have somebody by your side who you can trust like Simon and confide in to really help you to plot that path to success.
And Malli, at Blick Rothenberg, you deal with founders, you deal with leaders. This must be sounding familiar to you.
Absolutely. So sort of at Blick Rothenberg, I sort of lead on the entrepreneurs proposition. So we're dealing with entrepreneurs all the time. And it's interesting to see. I find it fascinating, you know, no disrespect from Rob, but like the character traits of an entrepreneur are amazing and always fascinates me. So I think they tend to be very problem solving orientated. They find an issue and then become very obsessive with that. And I think that's what leads into other character traits like being super resilient and adaptable, because you do have that vision of this problem that you're trying to solve and you want to get through that regardless of all the sort of obstacles that are in your way. And the other character traits tend to be things like really good at communicating, because you need to communicate that vision to your team, to investors, to get through all of that. So, I mean, Rob's an amazing entrepreneur, and it's that completely resonates.
And Simon, that journey from founder to leader, the early stages, well, you mentioned just an acceptance that you don't have all the answers yourself. And that can be a difficult thing. If you've set the business up, you've been the driving force all the way from its inception. That can be a difficult thing to come to terms with.
It's very difficult. So, and it doesn't, I think the relationship between a founder and anybody who's there to try to give them help takes a little bit of time to build, for the honesty to kind of fully emerge. And it also takes the coach, in my case, you know, in Rob's case, a bit of time to get to know the business of it and to understand a bit more deeply what's going on and what's getting in the way of progress. And, you know, and I think back to those early days, Rob invited me to come and observe one of their team meetings, leadership team meetings. And Rob, I sat there. I was quite a struggle to sit through the whole thing, to be honest with you, if I'm being brutal. I mean, it was the leadership he was meeting, and it met for the whole day, you know, was there? And I waded through about 100+ actions, some of which were clearly quite significant, some of which seemed unbelievably trivial. Everybody was exhausted, and at the end of it, and I looked at Rob, and he looked at me, and he said, "It's not going to work, is it?" And I said, "Well, you already know that this isn't working." And that's a massive start, because I think Rob knew why he needed help at that point. And I gave him one permission to say it out loud and a safe space in which to say it, because as he said, the role of a founder / CEO in any business context for that matter is quite a lonely one. And to look vulnerable in front of either people who work for you or your investors, I mean, even your advisors, is quite hard for some people. And Rob and I built such a strong chemistry between us, we could pretty much say anything we needed to say to each other in both directions, by the way. So I think that made it, we had a sense of team about, we're going to try and solve this problem together. And I think in the early days, it became obvious to both me and Rob that there were probably 3 or 4 things we needed to absolutely get right. I mean, one was to help Rob to adapt to the leadership role. And what does Rob need to learn to be a great CEO? And I wanted him to have the confidence that he wouldn't just be acting as CEO, he would be a great CEO, which is what he turned out to be. Secondly, we had to get the team right. Rob knew his team, who had worked so hard to get the business to where it was and were good people. and some of them were friends of Rob's. But this team was never going to help the business to make that transition into being a successful mobile player that was profitable and growing. So we had to face many difficult decisions, difficult especially for Rob, about how we're going to tackle that in a way that was sensitive, but moved the business on to a better platform for growth. And I think the third thing I'd call out was that we needed a strategy. The business really was very reluctant. I think Rob was very reluctant. A lot of founders are quite reluctant to commit to certain types of outcomes over certain time periods, partly because the business environment was so chaotic and fast moving. It was like, how can we commit to any future goals because they're out of date as soon as we've agreed them? But then there's a lack of accountability in all of that. And Rob really wanted to take the business successfully into the mobile space. So we needed to get some clarity about what that required. And we needed to stop people wasting their time on things that really weren't moving the dial and to focus on the 2 or 3 absolutely pivotal things that would transform this business. So they're some of the main things that we worked on together, right?
Yeah. Rob, that's not just a challenge for the business. It's a challenge for you.
Yes, a massive challenge. And I think it was Elon Musk that described the entrepreneurial journey as like eating broken glass while staring into the abyss of death. And I'm not sure I'd describe my...
always understated.
Yeah, it's always understated. I'm not sure I'd describe it exactly in those words, but there are times where it is an intense challenge and it can take its emotional toll. And as Simon mentioned, in doing our planning, our strategy planning to pivot the business from this website into the mobile space, we started to recognize that the executive team that I had assembled was not going to be equipped to execute on that plan. And the thing that complicated things further was that in the early days of Miniclip, I hired people that I trusted. I hired people that are close to me. And I think that's quite common for startups. And those people were my friends. They were my acquaintances. So when you fast forward 10 years later and you're in this situation, you're then in that horrible scenario where you're potentially going to have to lay off your mates. And I really struggled with that emotionally. And thank goodness I had Simon by my side, because you obviously doubt yourself in that situation. But Simon gave me the courage to make those decisions, and he helped me understand why I was no longer the founder and friend to these guys. If I wanted the company to survive and I wanted it to pivot onto mobile, I had to become the leader and guide it across those choppy waters to become, a successful mobile games company.
Is that a resilience that you have to learn, the ability to have those difficult conversations?
I think you do. I mean, if you've run a business for 10 years, you've got to have difficult conversations. These ones were particularly difficult.
But these are personally difficult.
They're personally difficult. I mean, the good news is that you fast forward 15 years later and those people who sadly had to leave are still my friends, and, our friendships prevailed. And so I think the way that we handled those discussions, the fact that this was an existential threat from outside, people understood that. And I think, they were the ones that lost their jobs. So I'm not going to say that it was easy, but I think that they could see the writing was on the wall. And so it made that communication slightly easier. And that was the point where Simon and I realized that we would need to bring in subject matter specialists, vertical specialists that could help us understand the mobile ecosystem and move the business forward in that direction.
Was that the hardest thing that you had to do in this process?
Unquestionably the hardest thing.
So one of the things that I think made it at least palatable for Rob is that once we'd made the decision about what he needed to do, we did it in a way that I guess was as kind and as sensitive as you possibly could. And we tried to help in every case people to move on with grace and opportunity in front of them. I mean, there's nothing worse if you think about it, looking backwards or looking forwards, that of holding back a business that has such potential because of an act of kindness. So we had to face that issue, and Rob had the courage, because that's another word we don't use enough, I think, is one of my favorite virtues. And I think founders are kind of embracing leadership need to find their courage. And this was one of those moments for Rob, probably the defining moment in the story. We needed to do what was right for the business, not for Rob on a personal level. And he had the courage to do that. And we did it in the best way we could. And all those relationships, the ones that really mattered to Rob, are intact, thankfully. So it doesn't. So I sort of feel very glad for Rob that when you look at his legacy, it's not just a great business, but also he hasn't left a trail of broken relationships behind him, because I think that is the risk of situations like that.
Malli, this reminds us that change in business can be really, really difficult.
It is, absolutely. I think the startup element of the growth cycle of a business is probably the most exciting, because you've got an idea, things are happening very rapidly. It's kind of scrappy, a little bit disorganized, but it's all go, go, go. You know, it's a little bit disorganized, but really, really fun. And you're sort of trying to see, you're validating the idea. You've got a good idea. Is it actually solving a real problem? Are you going to get the customers that are going to buy into that problem that you've found? But then you get into a slightly more serious mode of growth, and that's where things start getting a bit more serious in terms of, have you got the funding available? Through your customer research, have you actually got the customers? Is this going to be a long-term play? You're going to have to recruit more people. And as sort of Rob alluded to, you go from a sort of a startup phase to now you've got to, do you have the right people in your team? So it starts getting a lot more serious, a lot more organization needs to come into it. If you start getting your investors or external investors on board, then they will want to see what's going on with the business. So you've gone from total ownership, total visibility, to third parties now asking questions which you're not used to as an entrepreneur initially. So you have to get that across.
And you can't just throw them out of the office.
No, because they've helped funding. They've helped fund your idea, which is hopefully going to be an amazing idea. And then you get to that stage of maturation where the business has to decide, is this actually going to take a complete lift off? And where are we heading? Is this going to be a lifestyle business, or is this actually going to be a business that we're going to think about selling and growing to other markets, which means better systems, better organizational elements to the business, more people, advisors, which hopefully gets you to the place that you need to.
And for some founders, it means looking in at themselves and working out where are the weaknesses.
Correct.
And how to address that.
And there are several founders who are highly creative. And then when it comes to the finance elements, it's just not their skill set because it doesn't interest them. So I think it's just having that insight to know whether they need to bolster that element that they're just not as keen on doing, and having an operational team and CEO and FD. And I think that's where we sort of come in sometimes, and we see that pivotal change. And we can assist with that.
That's quite a nice sort of pointing back to the Miniclip story, because I think if it was only a sort of the pain and difficulty of making tough decisions, a lot of founders would probably at a certain point say this is just getting too hard. But actually what started to happen as we started to change the team and we got good professionals coming into key roles like finance, is we saw the business really start to motor. We started to see real signs of transformation and improvements in performance. And I think when you start to get that sort of those results starting to come through, and you're in Rob's situation, it gives you enormous confidence that you're now on the right path and you can go faster and further. I think because that's what you need. You need to see evidence that what you're doing is working. If you don't get that positive feedback, it feels like a really brutal journey. And in some businesses, it feels like that for a long time, actually. That's one of the things that really requires enormous resilience from founders to keep going when it feels like, you're deep in trouble or it's a struggle. It's an existential struggle. And the grit that you need often comes, as I think it did a bit in Rob's case, from your sense of purpose. He never lost that sense of purpose, which is what kept him going through the darker times to get his business and get the idea that he started with to work. And, it's like running a marathon, as I'm fond of talking about. I talk rather too much about in the book. But I mean, Rob's running his first marathon next year. And, I think you quite quickly learn that, you really do need to focus on your purpose and why you're doing something to keep going when things get tough.
How do you do that, Rob? How do you evolve the business but still remain true to the founding ambitions or the basic purpose that spurred you into creating the business in the first place?
I think it's often about the culture. I mean, we had an amazing culture at Miniclip, and a very strong sense of purpose. We knew that our mission was to really change the games industry for the better, democratize it and make games more accessible. And we knew that we had success in that mission on the web, and we knew it was going to work on mobile. So we had a kind of prevailing wind that was blowing in our direction from the industry. But it was challenging, and as Simon says, you do doubt yourself during some of those really challenging points. But fortunately, we made it through. It was a very close call at times, but we made it through, and I'm relieved that we're here today to tell the story.
Simon, just set out for us, for the founders who are listening to this, if they are also to become leaders, what things do they need to think about? They need to think about strategy.
Yeah, they do. I mean, that's one of a range of things to sort of take on board, I guess. I guess the leadership fundamentals for any founder to embrace or to build a team that's capable of embracing, which is probably at the heart of this. One is around leadership itself, looking at yourself and surrounding yourself with people who are better than you in their disciplines, and who, if you get them working well together, they have a synergy that really does power the business forward. There's strategy, getting your strategy straight, and that requires a focus on what are the decisive challenges that are critical to the success of the business. And in Miniclip's case, the focus on going to mobile and doing that at pace was absolutely paramount. And anything that wasn't helping with that, any other investment, discretionary investment, should really go into that. Getting the organization right, I think there is a sort of period of going from scrappy startup to a more professional firm. There is a necessary level of organizational discipline that you need to build. Again, for a lot of founders, that's quite a hard thing to have to address. So there are ways of doing that, I think, that give founders comfort that they're not losing some of the energy and vitality and flexibility that is essential to the success of the startup. It's about migrating towards something that has a bit more discipline, but still retains its agility and its momentum. And then on the other side of my framework is getting your purpose and culture right. Rob mentioned culture. He had a clear sense of purpose for the business, but getting the culture right and protecting that over time so that you never lost that sense of energy and that sense of fun and spirit that was there in the company. Just because you're trying to get to a place where you're a bit more professional, have a bit more discipline, it doesn't mean to say you should risk losing some of the qualities that help build that successful company in the first place. And maybe the last piece in that jigsaw is talent. You've got to make sure that not just in the leadership team, but at other levels in the organization, you've got brilliant people in critical roles. And you work hard to build out a kind of environment where they can do maybe the best work of their careers, ideally. we're trying to create an environment where people come, they love their work. There's a sense of play, a sense of purpose, and a sense of personal growth in it. And I think Miniclip worked quite hard to make sure that that was the case. So I guess those are the sort of 6 areas that I would highlight that founders need to pay attention to. And of course, I try to write about all of those in the book so that some of that knowledge is accessible.
And Malli, relationships are critical as well, not just your own relationships as the founder with your team and your colleagues, but also those external relationships with funders, with partners, with investors.
Yeah, with every business, I mean, cash is king and is the bloodline for the business. So throughout the whole every stage of the business, you'll need to entertain investors and think about how you're going to do that. Be it through giving away equity, or taking on debt, and those can be troubling concepts for brand new entrepreneurs who are doing it for the first time, and therefore that's where advisors can be helpful to be the guiding light to help negotiate that process. And so entrepreneurs are going in with their eyes wide open to decide what investment they take on board.
Are there particular things that investors are listening for or looking for? Every business is different, of course, but are there sort of broad things that are common across the agenda?
The broad brush thing is, obviously, they do buy into the entrepreneur. So is that entrepreneur, the concept that they're coming out with, does that make sense? Do they believe that there is a customer base for it? And not only is there a customer base for it, is it scalable? That'll be the first thing. Then they'll look at what the team looks like and what the financial discipline of the business is. But I think it depends on which stage it's at. If it's at the startup phase, then there'll be some concessions given to the fact that it's not making any profits yet. But then as you're getting to the growth phase and maturation phase, then there'll be a lot more due diligence being undertaken. And I'm sure Rob's seen it through all the various
and
stages.
The founder is the key person in all of that.
Initially, but obviously, but I think as the business team grows, then it'll be what does the team look like?
Were they investing in you when Tencent came along and did the deal?
I think it was a combination of the leadership, so not just me, but the leadership team, because they obviously want to see that there is the capacity to have succession built into that. And also it was a strength of product, because in our industry, like many things in the entertainment industry, it's a hit-driven business. At that point, when we sold the company, we had a hit game 8-ball pool that had generated almost $1 billion of revenue. And so I think they felt like they were buying into something that had momentum, and they believed that the team might be able to come up with other hits. And they were right, because we grew it 10 times bigger after they acquired it. But fundamentally, it was a combination, I think, of product and people.
And then you stepped away from the leadership role.
I did, yes. I mean, Miniclip had been my entire career, as I mentioned earlier on. But after being the CEO for 20 years and having run 2 different businesses and spent a lot of time doing that with Simon, who was helping me, I was quite frankly exhausted. And so I recognized that I probably didn't have enough energy to take the business through its next growth phase. And I wanted to avoid something that Simon talks about in his book called The Founder's Trap. I mean, Simon's probably best to define this, but the way I understand it is that as an entrepreneur, you have this incredible relationship with the business that you found. You love it dearly, and sometimes that love limits its potential to grow. And I did feel at this stage of my career that it was probably about time that I let go a little bit and allow somebody else to take over from me. And fortunately, we have an amazing career development program in Miniclip. We really do believe in talent and promoting great talent. And I had a guy who I hired in my legal team, who was one of the most junior lawyers, who joined us 10 years previously, who had demonstrated to me that he had incredible energy, passion, and commitment to Miniclip. And so he succeeded me. And took over as CEO a few years ago, and the company's just gone from strength to strength under his leadership.
And you're not backseat driving.
No, I was very, very clear with him that he is the boss. In my new role as president, I work with our parent company, Tencent. I sit on the board. I am still involved in some culture and people matters because I believe that fundamentally Miniclip will only succeed if people can do their greatest work there. But he calls the shots and he is the boss.
Please tell me you are at least able to enjoy the fruits of your success, that you're having a lovely life of leisure, or you're investing in other businesses or things that you enjoy.
Yes, I have been able to do that, and a bit of trickle-down economics in that I am investing in other startups, particularly those that are founded by dyslexic people, because I, obviously being one, believe wholeheartedly in them. And as Simon mentioned earlier, also doing a bit of exercise, taking on the marathon next year in April, which I'm looking forward to.
So this is what, your first marathon?
First marathon. And I like to win.
How are the knees?
Knees are sore and they're hurting while I'm sitting here.
But even sitting down is sore.
Yes.
I don't know if that's a good sign or not. Simon, sometimes you have to say goodbye.
Yeah, you do. Letting go can be quite a hard thing to do, but if it's in the interest of the business or if it's in your personal interest, then it's the right thing to do. It's quite hard for founders, I think, to do that because, as I said earlier in our conversation, they are the biological parents of the business. And, I've got a 29-year-old daughter and she's left home. So there is a moment when you really have to let go and just enjoy a different kind of relationship with them. And that's healthy. And I see that with Rob and Miniclip. It's an immensely healthy relationship. And by the way, we were talking about founders and whether they are investing in the investors, whether they're investing in the founder or they're investing in the business. In the end, for a lot of investors, I think, having a business that's over-dependent on the founder is a problem. So you actually want a business to be a founder independent, ideally, in the long run. And I think, the founder himself or herself is not scalable. The business is. So this is a kind of thing to get your head around, I think, whether you're the founder or whether you're investing in other founders, is how do you build an organization that has a long-term sustainable future with or without the founder, whether they become their long-term CEO or not. And the founder's trap teaches us, Rob mentioned, that a lot of founders end up not being part of the long-term future of their business. Something like 25% make it through to IPO if the business gets that far, and not many do, let's face it. So founders typically exit much earlier in the life of their business. And that might be the right thing to do for them. It might be the right thing to do for the business, but every case is different. There is no one right answer to this question.
Though, of course, Malli, if you are saying goodbye to the business, then that's probably the time that you need some sort of advice on, tax.
That was a very good segue.
Yeah.
That was a very good segue.
Where might we go for that?
But yeah, but on a serious note, it's true. I think when founders do exit their business, I think there is with not everybody, but some of them, it becomes a bit of an anticlimax, and they kind of feel like sometimes they lose their identity, and also you're kind of replacing something that you loved, which is a business, and you've got another asset, which might be cash or whatever, which is sitting in a bank account, but it doesn't really have any emotional attachment to that. And I think the instant reaction is just to allocate it to several people to invest, and then you just sort of step back. But I think that is actually the key time to think, actually, this is another phase in your life, and you treat that as a potentially new part of your new business going forward, which is investing into other founders, investing it for the long-term legacy of yourself and your family. It's the fruits of your labor. So you want to make sure you do that efficiently. And that's where obviously, tax advisors and wealth planners and others can assist.
Rob, sum all this up for us. When someone stops you in the street somewhere in the world and tells you what a great influence Miniclip was on their childhood and how grateful they are and all the rest of it, and then they say, oh, by the way, I'm an entrepreneur. What advice can you give me? What do you say to them?
Well, that's a good question. There were so many lessons that I've learned over 20 years of being the CEO of Miniclip. Resilience is definitely one of them. But I think, as we spoke about earlier, thanks to Simon, it's having the courage to make some of the tough decisions, whether that be in personal life or in work life. I think it's difficult for many of us to work out the opportunity cost of putting those decisions off. And as human beings, we are exceptionally good at doing that. But thankfully, I had Simon by my side to really give me the courage to make the tough decisions. And that's the reason that Miniclip had a second lease of life and that it's grown to become the amazing company that it is today. For new entrepreneurs today, I have this sense that new entrepreneurs like to have optionality. And I think that's a really bad thing when you start a business. My advice is that you should go all in on your best idea. You should give it your absolute focus, and you should not try to have any plan B in place. With Miniclip, there was no exit ramp for me. This was my only chance. I didn't have a ton of different career options open to me, and there was no way I was going to let it fail. And I think part of the reason why it sustained through that difficult period was because I just was never going to give up. And I think that's the advice that I'd give to any entrepreneur: never give up.
They sound like really difficult people to give advice to.
No, they're amazing people. They're just. Seriously, they're resilient. They're courageous. They are okay. They're a bit obsessed, and their creativity doesn't always lend itself to the kind of things that they need to pay attention to as well in order to be successful. But what kind of world would we live in without these people? I think the stats are that small and medium-sized enterprises, which includes a lot of those startups that Rob is referring to, employ over 60% of the UK population. They create enormous value in this country and around the world. And we should do everything we can to help them to succeed. And you should remember, at the heart of all of the difficult decisions is a human being and a human story. And most of the big challenges that you face are not the kind of things that I hear people talking about enough, whether you're online or in other books. People talk about cracking business models and, finding product market fit. These are all really important things, but if you don't look after yourself and if you don't build a great team around you, if you don't learn to lead, you're not going to be successful. It's as simple as that.
And Simon, we've mentioned your book, Founder's Legacy, a few times already. Just tell us what's in it.
Okay, so the book's for founders who recognize they need to become leaders, and is for leaders who want to lead with a founder's mindset and who understand the value of that. And I think it helps for founders to find their own route to success. It's not, telling you this is the only way to do it. There is a sort of magic formula you can follow. It starts from the place which says that you've got some unique qualities, and I want to bring those unique qualities out in you so that you can be successful in your own right. It's in 3 parts. There's a early part which is about what it takes to lead, the kind of things that Rob has talked about resilience and courage and humility. There's a middle part which is about the job of a leader, which I talked about with regard to things like strategy setting, getting your culture right. And then there's the last part, which is all about the sort of tactical challenges that founder leaders face, like letting go and hiring great people. It's designed to be used as a companion for the journey of a founder rather than as a kind of sort of read it from front to back and then put it back on the shelf. I think people are finding it incredibly helpful to just dip into relevant subject material when they're facing a particular challenge. So yeah, those are some of the things that the book covers. In the end, leadership is really tough, and I've tried to write in a very empathetic way to give a founder some support, some moral support and some practical support so that they can turn their business into a very successful business, whether it becomes a unicorn or not.
What a great conversation. Malli, Simon and Rob, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today. If you'd like to listen to other Brave Business episodes, you can find them on your favourite podcast service, or for further insights to help entrepreneurial business, you can visit Blick Rothenberg's Entrepreneurs Hub. You'll find it at www.blickrothenberg.com/entrepreneurs. I'm Declan Curry. This has been the Blick Rothenberg Brave Business podcast. Thank you so much for being part of our conversation.